Well, my next guest story and journey with infertility is just beautiful, is such a redemption story. Charmaine Balmer and her husband Mark struggled with infertility for 4 years before, and I'm going to leave it with that, Charmaine, because I want you to fill in the gaps of that story. So let's start off first. You and Mark struggled with infertility for 4 years. What was that journey like for you and Mark?
Well, to be honest with you, it was a total surprise because we got married in 1991 and we were just finishing up school in university in Canada. And then we moved down to California and he started as a youth pastor intern there. And, we thought we did what everybody does, most people. We thought, oh, we'll wait 6 months to a year and maybe, we'll start trying for a family. And that's what we did. And didn't really think much of the fact that it didn't start, nothing happened 6 months to a year. And then I started, kind of wondering. And, this is almost 30 years ago now. And no one really talked about infertility then. And I had just didn't even ever come across my mind that this might be an issue. And we went to a doctor and they said, oh, just relax, you're fine. It's, you're young. So we ended up moving to Florida after being there for about 2.5 years. And I had started to really start to struggle with the fact that I couldn't get pregnant. And in Florida, it became a much bigger deal. Mm-hmm. And I, especially as a pastor's wife, he was a youth pastor again in Florida. I struggled with month after month after month after month not getting pregnant. And I really became depressed. Wow. And I also really struggled with, God must be punishing me. What have I done that I cannot get pregnant? And I'm working with teenage girls who have no problem getting pregnant, can't take care of their babies. And I just want it so badly. So for me, I had to hit a real low for a while to really, really wrestle with it was kind of a crisis of belief and crisis of my faith where I had to reach out to people. And this is one of the biggest parts of my story is that my sisters were amazing and my mom, but I had a couple of friends in particular who I literally called every time I found out I wasn't pregnant and just cried. And they prayed with me on the phone. And it makes me emotional right now thinking about it. 28 years later, that the people walking alongside you. And literally last week, I did that with somebody. And I said, it's almost been 28 years, but I know how you feel. And the emotions just are right there, Yeah. But to try to encapsulate this, we did start to pursue fertility doctors and nothing was working there either. We did all the different medicines and things like that, but I didn't want to go the real route of IV because we didn't have the money. And also I knew that if it didn't work, we were spending money that we did not have and we're back to square one. So I would say 2-3 years into this journey, we started pursuing adoption. And I remember the first thing I read on the adoption application was, have you grieved the inability to have a child? And if you haven't, wow, you should not biologically. And it really struck me because I thought, well, yeah, I have. But it really was profound because I think that is a process of infertility that many women go through and they don't even realize that's what they're going through.
So Charmaine, the grief part you're saying that
Yeah.
you're saying a lot of women don't realize that they need to, or don't realize that what they're feeling is grief.
Both.
Okay.
Because I remember jumping. I won't jump too much ahead, but even well, yes, I would say both. I will jump ahead too much if I go into my story more. But it took me a while to realize that that's what it was. And so I thought that was a very interesting question. And so we pursued this adoption journey. And for us, we were in Florida at the time and we decided to pursue domestic adoption. To this day, I'm not really sure how God provided financially, but He did, because we did not have the money for this. My parents helped, and but God really provided in ways that is amazing. And 9 months after we started the journey, we heard that there was this little boy born to a woman, um, that 2 weeks before. Now she had, um, normally you are matched with someone who, um, had just gotten pregnant, and you have to go through the whole journey with them, and then they may or may not decide to place the baby for adoption. So this was a unique situation. Um, she chose us out of the several families. She chose us, and we were able to
Wow.
meet her, about just briefly one time, and before she or before we met our son. And long story short, it was really it was a roller coaster, because we were supposed to pick him up, um, shortly after we were matched, and he came down with a kidney infection, or a
Oh,
ureter infection. So they stopped the whole thing. We'd already driven 2 hours to this agency, because we were not close to it, and we had to go home empty-handed. And it really was like a loss again, because I was convinced that we were never bringing him home, but
right.
you know that was
Yeah.
just me despairing.
Yeah.
But
Charmaine, let me just ask you this. How were you and Mark through this? I mean, as a couple going through infertility and then making the big decision to adopt, it was like what my parents, had to decide when they adopted me. But what was that like for Mark? What was that like for you and your marriage and relationship going through 4 years as pastors and people in ministry, not able to, at the time get pregnant?
well, that's a very good question, because I think it can push you apart, or push you apart or bring you closer. Fortunately, it did bring us closer. But what I did find, it's just like grief, um, in marriages as well. If a couple loses a child, now I haven't gone through that, but I've seen people go through that, and
Hmm.
you grieve differently. And it's the same thing with infertility. Um, Men deal with it way differently than women. It's more of a check your boxes, do what you got to do. Whereas me, I was despairing, like it,
Yeah.
and he was never like that. He wanted to support me, he wanted it, but not even close to the same level. And I think that was the hardest part for him, was not being able to help me, and not being able to fully
Mhm.
grasp and feel the same things that I was feeling, because women just have a deeper, um, longing for that. I think it's,
Yeah.
it's God given, I believe. So, but
Did
he was extremely supportive through all of it, but I don't think he always knew what to do.
Yeah. Was there any sort of crisis of faith for him? I mean, for you, it was like, God, why are you punishing me? Why this? What was sort of the faith journey like in your home during these 4 years?
There, he shares a story, and I wish he could share this with you now, but he shares a story where he just was at a loss of what to do. We weren't hearing, we weren't getting matched. I was just, not in a good place. I was just really struggling. And he said he just fell on his knees in his office at work one day and just said, God, we need to hear from you today. And, our faith journey is not like that. We're not supposed to throw out the fleece. It's not usually like that. But that very day, we got the call,
Mm,
about Jake,
wow.
the son that we adopted. And so it was really it was kind of him crying out, and God answered. He doesn't always answer that way, but he did. So it was
Amazing.
very, very, it was very amazing. It drew us, through all of this, my faith grew. I don't think I'd really hit, major bumps in the road in my life until infertility. So I think
Yeah.
for me, it really threw me, because I'd kind of just been floating along in life. And so looking back, I think it was absolutely needed in my life, but I never would have said that in the middle of it.
Right.
So
Yeah. So, Charmaine, 4 years of infertility, and then you decide in this situation, we're going to adopt. And so you
yeah,
adopt A boy?
Jake. Yeah.
You adopt Jake. Okay, so you adopt Jake. And then what was the next, because I mean the story is just is amazing in your story. So you adopt Jake, and then what happens?
Yeah, and we brought him home 2 days before Christmas, which was really really fun. And then we ended up getting called to Illinois to pastor. He was going to be youth pastor up in Illinois, and so the day that we were moving, we I just thought, I wonder if I'm pregnant. I was late, but I had wondered this many, many times, been late many, many
Hmm.
times. We literally stopped at a Kmart as we were driving out of Florida, and I took the test in a Kmart bathroom, and it was positive, and I was pregnant with our first son. What 9 months, and Jake was 9 months. So I really feel to, and we both really feel that we never would have brought Jake home if God had allowed us to become pregnant on our timing and on our terms. And so the boys are 18 months apart. And then that was quite shocking. Now, the sad part is I had postpartum and didn't know what postpartum was, didn't know what I was feeling, but I had that after Zane. So I kind of feel like I've hit about all the boxes you can hit in life with but I we got through that, and then I wanted to have another child, and endometriosis was my reasoning for infertility. And so we I had a laparoscopy done and was able to get pregnant with my daughter the very next month. So
Wow.
yeah, so I have, but that was 3 years after Zane. They're 2 years apart. So then we had Jake, uh, 8, and then 9 months, or Zane came along 18 months later. And then Mallory came along at when Zane was 3. Something, yeah.
So at this point, Charmaine, it's like, okay, you have your kids, you have your 3 kids, you've been through infertility. I mean, like you said, your story, infertility, postpartum, you get pregnant after you thought you couldn't get pregnant. Then you have a boy
Right.
and a girl, and you have adopted son, and yet you continue, you and Mark continue
Not for a
expanding your
while.
family. Okay, so not for a while, but you continue to expand your family.
Well, and the crazy part is it was 8 years
Okay.
of the 3 kids, and we're still in Illinois to this day where we came. We've been at the same church for 24 years now. Um, but this is a fun story because at when Mallory was 8, um, we were sitting at the kitchen table, all the whole family, and we had just a set that we'd gotten from somebody, and there was a chair, an empty chair always. It was just the 5 of us, but there was always 6 chairs at the table. But this one particular day, I had this strong impression that someone was missing. I didn't even know what that meant. And I'm normally the kind of person that immediately says what I'm thinking or immediately has to talk to my husband about whatever comes to my mind. And I didn't. I prayed about it. And I don't always pray first. And I prayed about it for about 2, 3 days. And then I went to him and I said, I have this really weird feeling that someone is missing and I don't even know what that means. And he says, I totally agree.
Oh,
And I was like, and we both were like, what does that even mean? And so it just started the conversation. I believe that
mhm.
God just kind of had to put those thoughts in our head, and that was a prompting. Um, and so it just got us praying. And at first we thought it meant foster care, but the foster system here is pretty broken, and we wanted to adopt. At that point, I was kind of uneducated, you might say, about the foster system, and I said what a lot of people say, well, I could never do that. That's too hard.
Mhm.
And so I did say that, and we pursued. Um, here's basically, we wanted to adopt children that were not people's first choice, which meant older children or sibling sets.
Right.
And it was quite a process because we were led to international adoption. But my husband was like, there is no way that we can afford that. No way. But we just we still felt like we should at least keep pursuing it. And again, I can't even tell you how God
Wow.
provided. I can't. But we were ultimately led to Ghana, West Africa.
Mhm.
And within about a year and a half, we were led to our two children, who were at that time 6 and about 2 or 3. The ages were a little bit um, ambiguous. And
Wow.
February, in fact, in about 2 weeks, it's 10 years that we brought home Peter and Akor. Her name's Akor, Akor.
Accord.
And he is
Okay.
now a senior in high school. Yeah, he's a
Amazing.
senior and she's in 8th grade. So
So
that
you
was
now
quite a
have,
journey too.
so you have two adopted children from Ghana, Africa, and then
Yes,
two biological children,
yes.
and then you have Jake is
Yes,
adopted, domestically
domestically.
adopted.
Yeah.
And
And then,
now, oh, go ahead, Charmaine.
no, go ahead.
And you also are an emergency rest home. Is that correct too?
We were, yeah,
You were
like,
okay.
we would be. There's just too many kids in the house
Yeah,
right now legally to even
yeah,
be a respite home. Um, are you asking about how the next 3 came?
yeah. So the next three came, and then I want to get to just some encouragement for those because the show is really focused on the journey of infertility. I want to get to some encouragement that
Yes.
you can share. So, how did the next three children come? Because that means you
Yes.
have 8 children.
Yes. From having not being able to have any. Uh, and I've just about any way you can have them, I've had them. So you be careful what you pray for. um, but I was very done. My oldest has fetal alcohol syndrome. So we had some very challenging years, and it took years for that diagnosis. And that's a whole other story.
Mhm.
So let's see, October of 2018, um, people that we knew in our church had a terrible crisis in their home, and they asked several friends would they be willing to be interviewed by DCFS to be an emergency placement. And so we said, okay, um, we'll help out. Didn't really even know the kids, didn't know their names, but we were treated as next of kin, which is why they were able to place them with us.
Okay.
So I remember the date exactly. It was October 2018. They were brought over. They were scared to death. And at that time, they were 4, 5, and 6. And we were thinking that this was going to be maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months, but then they could go back. Without getting into the messy details of that story, they never were going back. And
Okay.
I had another crisis. I had another crisis of belief and a big wrestling with God because, excuse me, I again remember this day also very clearly. These kids have a lot of trauma. They have a lot, they were just falling apart all the time. And
Right.
I was falling apart all the time. We were 1 month into it, and I said to my husband, I can't do it. And he wanted to keep them from day one. And I said, I can't do it. And I felt so terrible. I even called the caseworker and I said, I think that I can't do it. That's all I kept saying.
Right.
I can't do it.
Yeah.
I can't do it. And so she said, okay. And she called me back and she said, okay, I have a traditional foster home that we'll move them to. And as soon as she said that, I broke and I realized that I couldn't, that probably meant who knows if it was a Christian home or not, that they were going to have to get moved again to total strangers. And I thought, if I say no, can I look this little 4-year-old, 5-year-old boy in the eyes, say, you're going to have to go somewhere else. I can't do it because it's uncomfortable for me and it's hard for me and I'll never get to empty nest. Like,
Right.
it was
Yeah.
all selfish reasons.
Yeah.
And so I think I cried the morning to night that day. And again, I think it was because I was in the process of surrendering my comfort gets me every time because it was literally all about me
Yeah.
to say no. And so I said yes. Has it been a very hard journey? Oh my goodness, I'm exhausted. But has it been also the coolest blessing? Yeah. And so we adopted them on March 9th, just before COVID closed everything down. So we had a lot of bonding time right after that because
Yeah,
we were with each
a
other
lot of
all the time.
bonding time. I can see
Yeah.
Charmaine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Charmaine, just to close up this conversation,
Yes.
you've been through a lot, and it is an incredible story, and just how you and Mark have just opened up your hearts, your home, to these eight wonderful children. But I want to just leave it with this: for someone who is going all the way back to the 4 years of infertility, and then the decisions that you made that have really transformed and changed the lives of these kids, what would you say to a young couple who are really struggling, angry at God,
Yeah.
struggling in their own relationship? What would you say to them today?
Oh, first of all, my heart breaks for you. And it allow yourself to grieve, but know that God is near to those who are brokenhearted. And this is not God punishing. He's allowing things in our lives to teach us and to allow people. I just spoke with a lady last week who's in this very position, and there's both she and her husband are just dealing with it differently. And she said, she let me in, and she said, I've never let anybody in, and reached out, and it just helped her phenomenally to handle it better. And so I would, that's a big advice, is to let someone in who has been there. And when you start talking about it, the stories come out of other people who know exactly what you're going through. The fact that I can feel that emotion right at the surface 29, 30 years later,
Yeah.
it's hard. It's really hard. But God has absolutely been there every step of the way, teaching me and allowing me to go through that to be closer to him. And hindsight is always 2020. So I would, one of my biggest things is that when I couldn't pray, and there were many times I couldn't pray, I did two
Mhm.
things. I called someone and had them, they prayed for me,
Yeah.
and I prayed scripture, because sometimes there were no words that I
Mhm.
could come up with, that I just couldn't come up with words. And so I had a book that just helped me to pray scripture. And that's the most powerful thing you can do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful, Charmaine. Thank you so much. We need people, we need friends we trust, friends that will pray, have our back, be there, and we need the good word, the scripture, the promises of God to help us get through each day. Well, Charmaine
Yeah.
Balmer, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your inspiring story and your honesty. And
Oh, thank you
now,
for having me.
yes, thanks so much. And now let's go to a special person that Charmaine knows very well, Pastor Mark Balmer, Charmaine's husband, as he shares from the good word and encourages us today in our journey of infertility.